Hi, all. Welcome to this series of lectures in psychology. In this session, we shall be discussing the chapter 2 of the series Sensation, Attention, and Perception, wherein we shall discuss the various psychological and psychophysical processes that are involved in, uh, in causing the sensation, attention, and transducing the sensation into perception. Now, what all these processes, how they occur, and what do they mean? We shall be taking a greater uh, understanding from the discussion. Here we go. Okay, so as you may agree, as you may have known for long, that our sensory processes are aided, are facilitated by the five sensory organs that all of us are equipped with. That is the uh, hearing, the sound, the vision, the smell, the touch, and the taste. So here we see how equipped, how capable we are as humans. We might appreciate that the capabilities of smelling, of receiving the touch, of tasting, and of gathering the sound, all these basic sensory capabilities vary from creature to creature, from species to species, as you may see, that the capability to gather the sound ranges anywhere between 2 hertz to 20,000 hertz for humans, whereas when it comes to elephants, as you may see in the image above, it has to be anywhere below 20 hertz, whereas when it comes to bats who gather only the sounds that are in the ultrasound frequencies, hertz is a unit of frequency, as you may have known. So they gather sound only when the sound is in the range of the ultrasound frequency, that is over 20,000 hertz. So beyond 20,000 hertz, human ears are incapable of gathering the sound, and about 20 hertz, elephants cannot gather the sound. So that suggests the sensory capabilities, how our sensory organs and the ulterior parts are designed to gather the sound. Likewise, if you look at the vision aspect, we are capable of identifying colors only that prevail within the range of 400, to be precise, in fact 380 nanometers to 700 nanometers. That's a range that prevails between the infrared and ultraviolet radiations. So any color, there could be millions of other colors that might exist in the nature, in the creation. However, any color whose wavelength is beyond 400 nanometers and 700 nanometers is beyond the human capability of identification. So that's how sensorily, by eyes, we are designed to identify the colors around us. Likewise, smell is another sensory organ, followed by tongue, and followed by tongue. As you can see, the various portions. So far, smell is concerned, the recent study suggests that the human nose is capable of identifying millions of smells. Um, However, we identify, we can name them only by a few names, as you may agree, and by taste. As you can see, the various portions of surface on the tongue are so designed, are so equipped to identify those primary tastes. As you can see, bitter, sour, salt, sweet, and there may be another fifth taste called umami, which is also identified as the taste that you gather by tasting this component called monosodium glutamate, as you may have tasted, which cannot be classified into any of these basic tastes, and hence referred to as umami. And we are capable of identifying these five tastes um, with the help of the sensory organ called tongue. Likewise, our skin is designed to gather the touch based on these three basic dimensions of the touch, namely the pressure, temperature, and pain. So we receive touch in form of any of these three dimensions: pressure, temperature, and pain. And so that's the basic design as to how we are equipped. We are designed with the sensory organ system, and hence we receive various sensory information from outside as stimuli, and which further get processed inside, and which finally comes back as a message, as a response for us to get into an action. Okay, so that gives a quick understanding about how the various psychophysical procedures. So what is psychophysical? We understand psychological. Uh, Psychological is so far the communication is concerned with the brain. When the stimuli, when the messages from stimuli reach the brain, it's psychological. But then before getting psychological, it starts as a physical process. That is the so far the sensory organs are involved. As we had discussed, we have the eyes, we have ears, we have the skin, we have the tongue, and we have the nose as the initial gateways of receiving the stimuli, and which are further processed with to the neural pathways. That is, we must appreciate the fact that each one of us is made up of some millions of bundles of neurons which are spread across the body all over, in such a way that all the neurons are absolutely they are very coherently connected with each other, comprising the two terminals called axons and dendrites, and each axon is connected to the dendrite of the other neuron, and the dendrite of one neuron connected to the axon of the next neuron. Likewise, all those millions of bundles of neurons present in the body are connected to each other, which unanimously terminate into the processing unit of the body called brain. And this is where so what does the neural pathways do? They gather the stimuli, whatever stimulus we through our sensory organs, namely your eyes, nose, tongue, skin, and ears, whatever stimuli, whatever various messages that we gather from the external environment, it gets passed on to these neural networks, which in turn act as the messengers of information from the sensory organs to the brain, so that the code of the stimuli is decoded by the brain, and the message in a decoded form, in form of response, is sent back to the body, the concerned parts, which prompts the person to get into a corresponding irrelevant action in response to the stimulus. Right. So this process of converting the message into a perceptual process into the brain, decoding the code, is what is referred to as transduction. Transduction is where the neural pathways are passing on the message to the brain, and brain is decoding the stimulus and giving it a meaningful interpretation. If it is fear, brain sends back that there is the relevant action that is supposed to that bears appropriateness, in response to fear. If it is happiness, happiness. If it is anxiety, anxiety. The relevant emotion, the relevant response behind every sensory stimulus is interpreted and decoded by the brain, which is referred to as transduction, and thus prompting the person into certain expected action. So that's how the psychophysical procedures are involved in which facilitate conversion of stimulus into response with the involvement of your sensory organs, your neural pathways, and various parts of the brain, the perceptual processes. Okay, that's uh, right. So, what do you mean by thresholds? Thresholds are those stimulus which are just enough. The quantity of stimulus which is just enough uh, to identify the existence of that particular sensory information. For instance, what do you mean by absolute threshold stimulus? Absolute threshold stimulus is that minimum stimulus which is which is just enough to identify the presence, the existence of that particular sensory information. For instance, as you see from the image, for the vision, what is the absolute threshold stimulus? For vision, it says that a candle flame can be seen at 30 miles on a dark, clear night, which means one candle flame is if you want to identify one candle flame from a distance, the light from a distance of 30 miles, one candle flame can be identified, and that's the minimum stimulus for that distance. If you are in excess of 30 miles, 35 miles, or 40 miles, a candle flame may not be adequate for you to identify the stimulus of light. It may have to be more than just a candle flame. So the threshold will have to be increased. Likewise, hearing. What is the minimum? The example of an absolute threshold or the minimum stimulus. It says the tick of a clock at 20 feet under quiet conditions. That's the minimum stimulus. If you are at 30 feet, probably you cannot gather the tick of the clock, and the absolute threshold of the tick of the clock as the stimulus of sound may not be adequate. Likewise, 1 teaspoon of sugar and 2 gallons of water is enough to identify the sensory information called taste. So, for 2 gallons of water, absolute threshold stimulus is 1 teaspoon of sugar. Likewise, 1 drop of perfume diffused into the entire volume of six rooms, which is enough to gather the smell of the perfume. So for 6 rooms to identify a smell, for the volume of 6 rooms to identify the smell, it just needs one drop of perfume. So that's the absolute threshold for that sensory information. Likewise, touch the wing of a fly falling on your neck, on your cheek from a distance of 1 centimeter. You can realize, you can feel, you can sense the touch of the wing of the fly, and hence that's the absolute threshold example of absolute threshold for touch. So while that is absolute threshold, which is the minimum stimulus, quantity of stimulus that is needed for you to identify the presence of certain sensory information, what is the difference threshold stimulus or just noticeable difference? While absolute threshold stimulus is anywhere above zero, what is the minimum stimulus? Just noticeable difference is what is the additional quantity of stimulus you need to add to the existing stimulus so that you you notice the difference from the previous quantity of stimulus to the subsequent quantity of stimulus. Hope that's clear, right? Just noticeable difference. Say you have one teaspoon of salt in a bucket of water, and that'll give you some taste. So what should be the additional quantity of salt you need to add to the same bucket of water so that you notice that there is a change in the taste? And that point where you can notice the difference, at least for 50% of the times, the number of attempts that you give to that you take to identify the difference is what is referred to as just noticeable difference. Say for instance, if you look at the examples now, the measures given here for light intensity, if you want to differentiate between the intensity of light, the additional quantity of light, additional units of light that you may have to add to the existing intensity of light is 8%, which means if you have a unit of light now, and you add 3% more of intensity of light to the same light, you may not be able to notice the difference in the brightness of the light, because it takes at least 8% or more of the existing intensity of light to identify the difference in the increase in the brightness of the light. So that's what we mean essentially by just noticeable difference, or in other words, also referred to as difference threshold stimulus. Likewise, sound intensity, if you want to identify the intensity of in this sound, the units of sound, you may have to add at least 5% more to the existing intensity of sound. What about sound frequency? You may have to add 1% more. That's enough to identify the frequency of the sound, the additional frequency of the sound. Likewise, odor. What should be the concentration of odor you need to add to the existing unit of odor? It says 15%. Likewise, salt concentration. Salt concentration to the existing concentration of salt, you may have to add 20% more to the existing concentration so that you realize the new stimulus added to the existing concentration. Lifted weights, when you lift the weight, what should be the additional weight to add to the existing weight so that you realize the difference in the stimulus, the new weight, it's at least 2% of the weight. Likewise, electric shock. When someone receives electric shock, when you want the person to receive a new shock which is identifiably higher than the previous shock, it should be at least 1% additional unit of current being offered to the person. So that was absolute threshold, and that was just noticeable difference or difference threshold stimulus, how we receive various stimuli in various units, in various volumes, in various quantities, and how we identify the presence of each of the sensory information. Okay, that's based on the previous 3 slides. You may answer these 2 questions as a part of assessment 1. Okay, that takes us to the next part of the discussion. What are the various illustrations? So based on what we have discussed so far in terms of the stimulus and response dynamics between the sensory organs, the neural arrangement, and the brain, which are the 3 primary components that contribute to the various stimulus response mechanisms that the human body is designed with, is equipped with. For that matter, any living creature is. So if you look at a few examples that illustrate, that elaborate on the stimulus response dynamics or stimulus response mechanisms, if you look at the dark adaptation, what do you mean by dark adaptation? Dark adaptation is a phenomenon wherein you see the change in the the process of transduction happening based on uh, the the time, the amount of time that you spend in the given ecosystem, rather than based on the amount of the quantity of the sensory stimuli. What I mean is, for instance, when imagine yourself going from a very well bright lit uh, space suddenly into a dark space like a movie theater. So when you instantly, when you're in the middle, when the movie is running already, and when you instantly suddenly enter into a movie theater from a bright space, you would realize you feel absolutely lost out. You can barely see anything, you can hardly identify things. But then as the time passes, so it's not the difference in the amount of brightness that is increasing, that remains same. But then as the time passes, the the vision, the visual capability is designed. The visual components are so designed that you gradually attain the visibility, and you can figure out the arrangement of the chairs, and you can actually go and identify your seat, and you can occupy, and you can continue interpreting the movie, and the people and the chairs in the surrounding. So that's the gradual process based on the time rather than the very sensory input, is what is referred to as dark adaptation. Okay, and there's another breakthrough theory that very well explains the human capability to um respond to certain stimulus, and which explains uh, the frequency of hits and misses that people experience while taking a call, in terms of identifying the stimulus, which is referred to as signal detection theory. As you can see, signal detection theory can be best understood with the help of the matrix that you see. That is, the response is present, yes or no, and the signal is actually present, yes or no. I think this can be very well understood with the help of one of the most contemporary, most current examples in the game of cricket. I'm sure each one of you have heard of uh, the, uh, the DRS system that the players usually, which expands into the decision review system, which the players go for when they are in conflict with the umpire's decision whether the batsman is out or not. So the DRS can be exercised either by the fielding team or by the batsmen on the crease, right? So if you look at the various situations that can fall into each of those four quadrants that you see, for instance, let's take the fielding team going for, say, umpire denying to the appeal of the bowler and calling it a not out, and the fielding team in not in agreement with the umpire's call, and they go for the DRS. So what is the situation here? Which quadrant of the matrix can you actually associate this with? Response. The fielding team is opting for yes response, which means the batsman is out, right? And what if the batsman actually actually is found to be out? You can identify this situation with the first quadrant. That response is yes from the fielding team, and the signal is also present, and so it's a hit, right? And the batsman is given out. Likewise, if you look at if you imagine a scenario where the response is yes, but the signal is absent, which means the umpire turns out to be right and he's not out, then it's a false alarm, right? And And imagine a situation where the batsmen are not agreeing. Imagine umpire has given it out for the batsman, and the batsman is not convinced with the decision, and they go for the review system, which means they say it's a no. It is the response is no. It is not out. And and what if the signal is present? It's a miss from the umpire side. The response is no. It's a miss for this fielding team, and it's actually a hit for the batsman. What if the what if the response is uh, is no? It's not an out, and the signal is the signal is present. So when the response is no, it's not an out, signal is present, it's again a hit for the batsman, and the umpire goes for the rejection, the correction of the rejection. And when it's against the batsman's appeal, it is a miss again. The signal is present, it is yes, it is out, and the response as they chose is no. So it's a miss for the batsman. So how you can see how they each of the sides, the batsmen, the fielders. So the dynamics is operating among these possibilities of the call being correct or call being incorrect, and the people calling it correct or people calling it incorrect, and the various quadrants that you see resulting in the outputs, namely hit, false alarm, miss, and correcting the rejection. So those are the various occasions where you see the signal detection turns out to be correct or incorrect based on the call that is taken by the the actors involved in the situation. Okay. Okay, so that's about the next sensory organ. Nose, as you can see, some of the facts about the olfactory capabilities of various creatures, fish, dog, and humans. But that gives a very clear understanding as to why dogs are used by the investigation squads, police, army, for various investigative purposes. Because about 1/3 of the cerebral hemisphere of dog is engaged in detecting smells, right? So its sensory capabilities through the nasal tract is very strong, and hence it has capability to sniff the suspicious things around, and hence it's used as a utility, as a resource, a very critical resource for finding out the the suspicious objects, especially in the crime scene. However, if you look at the fish's capabilities, it's even stronger than a dog. Almost its entire cerebral hemisphere is engaged in detecting smells. But then we cannot bring the fish out for sniffing purposes, so it's still dog as a choice of the animal of choice. Human nose, relatively to these creatures, it's very less capable. We have only 1/20th of our cerebral hemisphere, our cortex in the brain, which is engaged in identifying smells. Hence, we may not be as good as other creatures who have much greater capabilities. That's how we are designed. Okay, so that's a bit of sensory information about olfactory capabilities or sniffing, smelling capabilities. Okay, that puts us to the next part of assessment. Give an example each of dark adaptation, signal detection theory, other than those that you have listened to in the video just a short while ago. And the second one, why do you think dogs are the animal of choice for sniffing suspicious objects? Okay, so having understood the various sensory processes, the various physical processes involved in understanding, gathering the stimuli from around us and transducing them into a meaningful interpretations by the brain is the next part which we shall discuss in perceptual processes. So perceptual processes to understand are those various processes which are engaged in the process of in the process of passing on the information from sensory organs with the help of the neural arrangements and neurons, neural bundles to the brain and gathering a meaningful interpretation of the various stimuli around us. You know, we have each one of us has certain unique way of organizing the information around you, of understanding and interpreting the information around you, and hence you accordingly the brain sends a response and we get into a certain responding action, right? So what do you do? So firstly we pay attention towards the stimulus is the foremost activity engagement that we demonstrate, and which is how we gather the meaning out of the stimulus that you are exposed to. For instance, as you are listening to this lecture now, we are paying some amount of attention towards the lecture, and that's what facilitates understanding of the lecture. Imagine if you were listening this lecture with one earbud into one of the ears, and imagine if the second ear is receiving a totally unrelated information through another record. What do you think is the resulting effect? Do you think you can process both the sets of information equally coherently, equally meaningfully? Definitely not. We are not designed to do that way. We may be having two ears, but then we have only one brain to process the information. As you see there in the image, we are capable of paying attention selectively. We cannot pay a comprehensive, a holistic attention to all the stimuli through the same sensory organ that we are exposed to, right? We may hear, as you may see in the image, the person is exposed to two different unrelated video inputs. So his right ear is gathering the information horses galloped across the field, and his left ear is gathering the input which says President Lincoln often read by the light of the fire. So if you ask him as to what did he interpret, what did he gather as a sensory input, his speech output is President Lincoln often read by the light of the fire, and what he had gathered from his right ear does not register because of this feature called selective attention. And a couple of other phenomena which govern the attention process is the blindness, or those aspects of the stimuli which you do not pay much attention to, which can be understood as change blindness or inattention blindness. So for instance, there are two images which are almost identical. However, there are several aspects, maybe minute, maybe insignificant, but then there are differences in the two images. So that's a challenge for you. Can you spot at least 8 differences in the next 26 seconds and see how sharp is your sensory organ to observe the changes? If we cannot in the given time, what is referred to as change blindness applies to our sensory capabilities. Likewise, as the image suggests, can you find the error there? Can you find the error here? And there's an arrangement of various numerics. If you can find an error in the image, then you have you have overcome a phenomena called inattention blindness. In the next half a minute, if you can identify the error, that's great. However, many of us may not be able to identify the error because of our inattention to something that does not draw our attention obviously, evidently, visibly. It's somewhere hidden, and hence we may not be. So, likewise, there are various stuff, there are numerous stuff around us which may not be in the desired state, in the expected state, but just because we don't pay attention to it, inattention, because of the inattention, we just give it a blind eye, and it passes, right? So the aspects like selective attention, inattention, or change blindness are some of the aspects where you miss out on certain sensory inputs while while the process of paying attention to the inputs. Okay, so that was attention. Attention was the first perceptual process that helps in the process of transducting the sensory inputs from neural bundles to the brains. The second is what is referred to as localization. What are you doing in localization? You are finding your way in interpreting what is it that you're exposed to, what is the importance of that, what is the relevance of that, and is it and essentially what you're trying to figure out is which is the figure and which is the ground in the stimulus that you are exposed to. So for instance, the images that you see there is you see the entire image can be classified into broadly two colors, black and white. Now it is up to your neural structures and your interpretation by the mind whether you call the black color as a background and white as figure, or the other way, that is white as a background and black as a figure, right? If you choose to identify black as a background and white as a figure, then you may identify the image as a trophy, as you may appreciate, right? On the contrary, if you choose white as a background and black as a figure, then you may actually interpret the image as two faces which are facing each other. So that can be two different ways of interpreting the same image in two ways because of your choice of selection of the image into the figure and ground, and hence the interpretation changes. Likewise, you understand things by grouping, right? Grouping can happen based on basically five parameters that you can see through the arrangement of various symbols in the images. Proximity, you might group things by proximity, right? How close are the stimuli to each other? So that's one way. Or color similarity, you can easily group these various stimuli, the dots that you see there, into reds and blues. Why you are grouping them, though the reds are falling apart from, are separated from the next red by one blue between, but you still have the tendency to group the entire collection of dots into reds and blues because of the color similarity. Likewise, if you look at the grouping in the next, the basis of grouping is shape similarity, that is rounds and crosses, right? Though they are separated from each other by a different shape, we still have the tendency of grouping them because of their shape similarity. We have crosses and we have rounds, and we group them accordingly. Likewise, the fourth basis upon which you tend to group things is a continuity. The shape, the way it is continuing, the flow of the arrangement of the dots in such a way that you tend to, if you're asked to continue the movement of those dots, you would have a certain interpretation of its movement, and you may tend to let the movement of the dots continue in your own interpretation because of the continuity of the arrangement of the dots as it shows. Likewise, the last one, there is certain arrangement of dots which has a closure, right? What does it suggest to you? If someone describes you asks you to describe the arrangement of dots, you would probably call it a rhombus, which is uh, there between two parallel lines. Why? Because there is a definite closure to the shape, right? There is, uh, and the closure of this image is what is prompting you to uh, to understand, to interpret the image in certain way. Okay, so that's the second step of perceptual process, localization, wherein you are trying to understand the stimulus, you are trying to give certain meaning to the stimulus, you are trying to interpret the stimulus, and what facilitates these processes of understanding, interpreting, and giving some meaning. That is your choice of figure and ground. Which one do you see as figure and which one do you see as a ground? And how you navigate your understanding, how you grasp the meaning of the various stimuli, how you separate the objects from one another, how do you separate the basis of separating and grouping is determined by those five parameters, that is proximity, color similarity, shape similarity, continuity, and closure. Okay, that takes us to the next part of the assessment. Describe briefly attention as a perceptual process. Explain briefly difference between change blindness and inattention blindness. Okay, so that takes us to the third step or third process of the perceptual processes involved, that is recognition. How do you recognize? You know, we are essentially we are equipped with certain special capabilities of the brain, which is so hardwired to recognize the fundamental or the primitive features from, say, for instance, if you're asked to recognize the people in the images, while you may not be able to recognize all the three, but at least you can identify any two, right? So, for instance, if you are asked to recognize who is the person in the middle, I'm sure most of you, or there is a possibility all of you, can recognize the person. He is the celebrity cricketer, among the top batsmen in the world, who captains, who until a short while ago, who used to captain the Indian cricket team, Virat Kohli. Now, did you see, when you first saw Virat Kohli on screen, did you see him with this face? Certainly not. Still, we can see that he's Virat Kohli. Why? Because we are hardwired with the capabilities to identify the fundamental or the primitive features which prompt us to recognize things, to process our recognition, and hence we are able to identify the person as Virat Kohli, and it's a task for you to identify the person on either sides of Virat Kohli. Let's see if you know them, or if you know them, can you recognize them? Likewise, contextual relevance plays a very important role in recognizing the stimuli. So, for instance, the object that you see in the image on the right side, how do you identify it? Well, it's a little ambiguous, but then what can reduce the ambiguity, what can render meaning to the object, is how you process the stimulus, the object being the stimulus here, how you process it from a a global level to the local processing. What do I mean by local processing it from global to local context? That is, which context do you associate the object with? If you associate the object with the front yard near the gate of your home, then it might appeal to you as a letterbox. Whereas if you associate the stimulus with your kitchen, then it might appear to you as a loaf of bread. So it essentially depends on how your cognitive processes, your mental processes are processing the stimulus from global to the local level, associating it with certain specific, certain very clear context. Is it the kitchen context or is it the front yard context, based on which you can give certain, you can interpret certain meaning out of the object. So contextual relevance and identifying the fundamental or primitive features is essential, is an essential role played by the components of the brain which facilitate the perceptual process called recognition. Lastly, abstraction. So when you are familiar with certain object or person or the place, you know, you would have gathered, you would have grasped the minutes of the person so well earlier that you may not need the same minutes, you may not need the same elaborate information to recognize that person again and again and again, or that object again and again and again. You may just, once you're familiar, once you're in a position, your mind registers the stimuli already, you may not need the same minute, same detailed information every time you're exposed to the same stimulus. So, for instance, if you're asked to identify the people, though those are not very clear and perfect, complete, absolute photographs of the people, but if you are asked to identify the people, they are just the silhouettes of the two individuals, just very abstract level images of the people. But are you not able to identify them? I doubt that, right? So you can very well identify one person as Arnold Schwarzenegger and the other as the much celebrated executive Elon Musk, right? So though it is given in a very abstract, very sketchy and a silhouette version, you still have been able to identify because you already possess information about them, and your mental processes could revisit the existing information, pull out the information, put the pieces together, and comprehend the sketchy information you have, and make you gather the information completely. That's the fourth step engaged in the process of causing perceptions, that is abstraction. So that was attention, that was localization, that was recognition, and that was abstraction. And then finally we have perceptual constancy. Perceptual constancy, what does it mean? So again, that's an inherent capability of the brains to identify things by their size, by their shape, by their appearance, by the structure, and to interpret this shape, size, the dimensions, the various dimensions of these creatures as they are, wherever they may be. So, for instance, if you look at the two images, you have horses in both the images, but they are in different sizes. One photograph you may see the horse grazing at a distance, and the other image you see the horse in a much close-up distance galloping. So just because the horse is in a close-up here, does it mean that this horse is bigger than the horses that you see grazing? Definitely not, right? So brain is capable enough to maintain the perceptual constancy. The horse may be here, the horse may be there, the distance or the size of the retina, the size of the object that is falling on your retina may not be the actual size of the stimulus that you are gathering. That's the intellectual process carried out by the brain, which maintains the perceptual constancy. You may hear the sound of a bell from half a kilometer, and you may hear the sound of the same bell from 1 kilometer. Do you tend to believe that the frequency and the intensity of the bell has reduced? No, it is what has changed is the distance. So you may not tend to believe that the bell is throwing lesser frequencies and lesser intensity. You are capable of understanding that it's a distance that is causing the reduction in the dimensions of the stimulus, and hence you understand that it is perceptual constancy that is playing a role in keeping you in an absolute understanding about the quality of the stimulus, about the dimensions of the stimulus that you are gathering. Okay, so that's the final step of perceptual process, perceptual constancy. Okay, that's the next part of the assessment. Explain the importance of context relevance in recognizing the stimuli. Okay, so that was essentially about attention, sensation, attention, and perception, and the various dynamics, various processes, various components involved in the process of perception. Okay, signing off here, and we'll catch up with another topic in the series of lectures on psychology. Thank you all.